Hello to our greater educators. Welcome to the Directors Podium. I'm your host, Adam Christie. Our guest today is a New York Times best-selling author. For his books, Teach Like a Pirate, he is the president of Dave Burgess Consulting Incorporated, which published over 120 books for educators. He does consulting and is hired to speak all across the country. He specializes in teaching hard to reach, hard to motivate students with techniques that incorporate showmanship and creativity. He uses humor and magic as part of his shtick. So we are thrilled and so grateful he's joining us today. He can be found at daveburgess.com and Twitter at BurgessDave. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Dave Burgess. Dave, thanks so much for joining us today.
Hey, I really appreciate you having me on the show. Can't wait for the interview and looking forward to connecting with your listeners.
Awesome. Well, Dave, why don't you tell us, how long did you teach and what made you want to be a teacher?
Yeah, so I was a teacher for 17 years at West Hills High School in San Diego, California. And before that, kind of my gateway drug into teaching was as a basketball coach. I got hired as a basketball coach coming out of college after a couple of years, and worked several years as a basketball coach and loved working with the students so much that I went back at night school actually to get my teacher credential, became a teacher, eventually left the coaching behind, became a full-time teacher, and have loved it ever since. And so that was kind of how I got into teaching, was through basketball coaching.
And then you realized that you really loved it, huh?
Absolutely. And so I think there's a lot of coaching is teaching, a lot of teaching is coaching. There's a big overlap. And so I was feeling like I was making strong connections with students through the course of my coaching career. And it's like, okay, you know what? I want to go back to do this full time. And so carved out some time to be able to get some night classes in there, and got my teacher credential.
How did you think teaching changed over the years from when you started to when you left?
So I'm a little bit of an outlier on this. And like a lot of people talk about how kids are different these days. And I kind of feel a little different about that. I think kids at their heart are very much the same, and they want to be engaged. They want what they're learning to be relevant for them. And maybe the outside world is changing, and so what is currently relevant might change. But kids themselves are the same as they ever have been, I believe. And they're still seeking relevance. They're still seeking things that will engage them, empower them. They still want to try to be able to express their creativity. All those things have remained the same. It's just that maybe some things, the tools that we use to engage kids, the kind of things that we can tap into that are currently relevant, all that might change. But I think kids are the heart of the same.
So you think what motivates them has also stayed the same?
I think generally it's a human nature kind of thing. Like, for
Mhm.
example, a lot of the hooks, the engagement strategies that I talk about in Teach Like a Pirate, they're human nature. It's not something that engages just kids. It's not something that engages all ages. It's the kind of thing that draws you in almost magically or magnetically into what you're doing. And so layering those kind of things through your curriculum are going to work no matter what the time period is, no matter what age you're working with.
What would you say were your weaknesses, and how did you compensate for them teaching?
So I think one of my weaknesses as a teacher was I was slow to embrace educational technology. In fact, I almost prided myself in being slow to embrace educational technology, would kind of mock and make fun of people who had embraced educational technology. And I could still remember a tweet that I sent to this day, and I did it to kind of like to to kind of hit back at some of my buddies, some good friends of mine who are really into the ed tech and are always trying to get me to use more ed tech. And the tweet was basically this. It said, "What do you get when you take a poor lesson and add technology?" And then there was a riddle, and the answer was a poor lesson with technology. And so I was always wanted to go back to that pedagogy, that strong creating experiences for kids. Now, looking back at it, I wish I had been faster to embrace technology. And I think that it's just another tool in our kit that we can use to make lessons wildly creative, empowering, engaging. And so if I could go back and shore up any weakness, that would be one of them. I would be faster to get onto the ed tech bandwagon.
Yeah, it changes a lot. And if you're not on board, then it can get behind real quick. Dave, what would you say was your hardest moment in teaching?
Well, there's been lots of hard moments. I talk to people sometimes when I speak to a group of educators. I tell them, you know what, I've had more disasters than anyone sitting in this room. Not just lessons that weren't engaging. I've had lots of those too. I'm talking disasters. I've been injured in lessons before. I've had students injured in lessons before. I've had to sit in my principal's office and explain why I thought it was a good idea to have an open propane tank flame raging in the classroom, right? I probably should have known it was a problem first period when I had to have a kid standing on a chair up by the smoke alarm, waving a folder like this. But I was willing to accept the feedback from my administrators. I still do that lesson, but now I've just moved it to a dirt overflow parking lot. Usually wait till they're at a conference. I'm way into that begging forgiveness rather than asking permission aspect of teaching. And I think a lot of Teach Like a Pirate teachers are like that. But if I had to think back to one singular hard moment, I'll tell you what, I lost a lot of kids, more than one student over the course of teaching for 17 years. I remember the first student that I lost was in a car accident, and it was in between one day and the next. And coming back that day after the accident and the empty desk sitting like a hole in the heart of the classroom. I can still picture it to this day. Front to my center to a little bit to my right, everybody filed in and nobody came to that desk. It just sat empty. And just to feel that hole in that classroom's heart and just to sense that emptiness, and kids experiencing death for some of them for the first time, have it really smack them in the face that life isn't permanent and that we're mortal, and all those things, all those feelings. um, I say that that might have been my toughest teaching moment, and it happened fairly early in my career.
Wow, and so did you have to move that desk? Did you just move it out, or did you just get used to having it there?
Yeah, I mean, eventually it was something that became part of the landscape again. But I think that the key lesson, and it's a good lesson, I think, for right now with the pandemic, is letting students know that it's okay to not be okay, and that you don't have to come to grips with this right now. This is something something terrible has happened, and it's okay to be upset. It's okay to feel emotions about this. This is a traumatic event that has happened in all of our lives. You've lost your friend. I've lost my student. And we can support each other and help each other. And there are places you can go for support. But as the same thing that I tell teachers right now with their students. Hey, maybe the most important thing is not the next content standard, not the next little bit of your curriculum. Maybe the most important thing right now is to make sure that we're checking in with students, checking in with colleagues, and really focusing on those social emotional learning, those SEL components of education, because there's kind of this whole layer of trauma over top of society right now. There's always trauma in of itself, but now there's this whole layer on top of everything with the pandemic. And so taking some time to really check in and make sure we're addressing those SEL needs is a key component for teaching in 2020.
So talk to us about Teach Like a Pirate, your book. Where did you come up with the title?
Yeah, so this all started. My department chair came to me one day and said, "How cool would it be if you put together a workshop based on some of that crazy stuff you do in your room that nobody understands?" And I said, let's go. I signed up to do a full day workshop, 8 hours long. I had never done a workshop in my life. I signed up to do an 8 hour workshop for my peers, right? And so the pressure was on. I drove away from that meeting going like, oh my God, what have I just done? And so I got relentless about writing down everything I do in my classroom that I thought was successful. But then that wasn't good enough. I had to go back and figure out where did I get these ideas to come to, where did I get these ideas to come from? Or where do they come from? Why does this one work and why doesn't this one work? It forced me to become much more intentional about my teaching, which is, I think, a great thing about presenting. I always encourage people, go out and present, whether it's at your school site, your district, regionally, state, national, whatever. When you have to capture what is unique about you and what makes you effective as a teacher, and then teach it to someone else, it's going to make you it's going to make you a better teacher. It's going to make you more reflective and intentional. And so I created this workshop. I wanted to have a theme though. I wanted to be able to model and demonstrate what I do in my workshop, what I do in my classroom in the workshop. Like, I wanted teachers to feel what it was like to be drawn in by these ideas. And so I wanted it to be very much like my classroom. And so I wanted a theme. Well, pirates appeal to me because pirates are unconventional. They're willing to reject the status quo. They're willing to sail into uncharted waters with no guarantee of success. They're risk takers, rebels, mavericks. And I wanted to embrace that spirit of being a pirate, right? It was never about the dictionary definition. Like, we don't want teachers to attack and rob ships at sea. It had nothing to do with that, right? And so, and then pirates are known for having hooks. And this was all about how you could hook students and draw them into what you were doing in the class. And so I like that kind of play on words. And then I'm abnormally obsessed with acronyms. And so the first thing I did is I turned the page sideways. I still have the original page that I did this on. And I wrote down PIRATE down the page. And I just started to generate words that would fit into those letters and try to make an acronym. I knew I wanted to talk about passion and enthusiasm. They're the P and the E were sitting at the beginning and the ends of the word, like the cornerstones of it. And I knew I wanted to talk about building rapport with kids as sort of being the heart of teaching. There the R was sitting in the center, like the heart of the word. And so I never looked back. I did the workshop that summer in my district. And then I began to go anywhere anyone will listen to me to talk about these ideas.
That's great. I mean, that's just fantastic. Were you nervous about choosing pirates because it's, it could be bad in the sense?
Not at all. I have received some pushback on stuff like that. And the same people that give me pushback on pirates take their kids to the Pirates of the Caribbean when they go to Disney World or Disneyland, right? If you go to Party City, one of the top children's birthday parties is pirates, and all sorts of colleges, high schools, schools all over the world have pirates as their mascot. And it was never about any sort of criminal activity or any tie into that. So anyone out there who's trying to tie it into any sort of criminal activity or anything like that is just being absolutely ridiculous, and they're intentionally misunderstanding the brand. And I don't give them a second of my energy.
One of the things that I had read in your book is you talked about when you have to be creative with your lessons, and correct me if I'm wrong, but one time you made them have a password to get in the room. Could you tell us about different things you've done like that?
Yeah, so that's for the world famous speakeasy, the Mr. Burgess speakeasy. So when we're doing the 1920s, talking about prohibition and all of that, I would tell them ahead of time. So like, listen, on Friday, you don't have to have a password to get in. If you don't know the password, you can't get into class. And now here's the thing. For some teachers, if they said that, then the student might be, all right, cool, I'm not coming. But they knew there was something going on that was going to be amazing. This was going to be a ticket I call it a ticket lesson. And so one of the questions of Teach Like a Pirate is, do you have any lessons you could sell tickets to? Like, if you had a cash register at the door, do you have any lessons that kids would like plop $1 in there to come in? And so I always try to have at least, at least once during a unit, I want there to be a ticket lesson. And so this is a ticket lesson, the speakeasy. You got to know a password to come in. Well, students will start to feel a little stressed around this and say like, hey, they would come up to me like, I don't know what the password is for tomorrow. I'm like, well, you only got 24 hours. You better figure it out, right? And then you see students start to talk to each other. Hey, what's the password? Like, and it creates a little buzz, anticipation, mystery, curiosity, right, around this. And so then when they showed up then on Friday, the door's locked. And then they knock on the door. The door opened about 6 inches, and there I would be dressed in like a pinstripe suit, like a 20s era gangster, Prohibition era gangster. And I would ask them, and I'll tell you what the password was. I would ask them a question, which really they would probably only know the answer if they were a student in my class, because and I'll tell you what often it was. It was, who is Eric Weiss? Well, now, if you were a student in my class, you would know that Eric Weiss was the most famous magician of all time, Harry Houdini. And so, because we had talked about Harry Houdini in previous class. Well, if you didn't have my class, you have no idea who Eric Weiss was, probably, right? And so it was kind of this sense of like, oh, I'm an insider. I know, oh, Harry Houdini, come on in. And in they'd walk in. And I'd let them in at groups at a time with the password. It's just little stuff like that to create a little mystery, anticipation, have a little fun with it. And I call it preheating the grill. And so look, and this is another key tenet of Teach Like a Pirate. I don't put my steak down on cold. I'm barbecuing steaks tonight, by the way, later. I don't put my steak down on a cold grill. When you put your steak down on a cold grill, nothing happens. But when you put your steak down on a preheated grill, what happens? it sizzles. I want my content to sizzle when I drop it. So I'm always trying to preheat the grill, build up that mystery, curiosity, anticipation buzz beforehand.
I can imagine that as you're trying to make teaching creative and you're having these great ideas, they are outside the box, and that's what's great about them. But I know that I've had some administrators where they would not necessarily welcome that, because they do a risk assessment and they just don't like the idea because that sounds out of the norm. How did you push past that, or how did you get your administrators to buy into what you were doing?
Yeah, so a lot of people ask me this question about like they maybe feel nervous about what's going to happen on their campus if they start incorporating teach like a pirate strategies. What will the administrators think? And in general, I think this is a fear that is unfounded. And what I tell them is this: I say, listen, if you think about all the things that an administrator has on their plate that they have to worry about, that they have to be concerned about, that's on their radar, the idea that you, as a creative, innovative teacher who's developing strong pedagogical experiences for students, who has the kind of atmosphere that students want to be in class, and so the fewer behavior problems are reaching the front office, that you're going to wind up on their radar as a problem as opposed to a blessing does not ring true to me. And so I've seen fantastic support for Teach Like a Pirate teachers and strategies from administrators across the nation, across the world. And now, of course, you will occasionally have the outlier where there might be some sort of issue or problem, but that issue or problem is always, I feel it's with that administrator, or maybe a lack of knowledge. Maybe the administrator doesn't understand what's the principle behind what they're doing, or what the lesson goal was that this hook was being used to try to teach. And so I think it's to open it up. If there is a problem, you open up communication with the administrator, maybe invite them in. Let's see, here's another thing that happens. The teacher will say, well, I'm nervous that the administrator is going to walk in to evaluate me or observe me right when I'm in the middle of one of these crazy things. And I say, well, if you're worried about them walking in at the wrong time, invite them in at the right time. And so don't allow the only time that an administrator comes in your room to be just when it's at the administrator's whim. If you have things that you're doing that are powerful, that you would like them to see and observe, invite them in to see it. Then they'll have a larger context of your teaching. They won't just have that moment where they happen to pop in and something wild was happening. They'll have a larger context for what you're doing in your classroom.
Hmm. Okay, let's talk about attention getters. How do you normally get the attention of your classes?
Yeah, well, so in Teach Like a Pirate, there's 30 categories of hooks. And so that's one of the things I believe in, is that you need to incorporate hooks. And so it could be the teaser hook, like the preheating the grill stuff that we talked about. What are you saying the day before that makes them desperate to want to come back tomorrow to find out what's happening, right? What do you have written on your board when students walk in? This makes them go like, oh, like what is that? Like what, where they're asking each other, like, do you see that? What does that even mean? Or like an image on your screen, or the music that's playing that sparks a little, it puts a little energy into the room. What kind of props are you using? What kind of, have you used the interior design hook where you actually can transform the interior of your room in order to create some form of engagement or to tie into the lesson? What have you done to yourself? The costume hook, or I call it the guest speaker hook sometimes, where I would come as a guest speaker, means that I'm coming in character. And so all these these are things that are happening even before the bell rings, where there's a whole layer of things that you can use in order to draw that engagement, that mystery, that curiosity, create that buzz. And so in Teach Like a Pirate, there's 30 different categories of ways that you can draw student engagement using these pirate hooks.
Awesome. And how would you say that it directly impacts classroom management when you use these tactics?
Absolutely. And so this is in the art of war, they talk about the fact that the greatest, you know, the greatest victories, they're not won on the battlefield. The greatest victories are not having to fight, right? It's when you subdue the other's military without battle. That is the greatest victory. So in other words, we don't want to win the behavior management battles. We want to avoid, we don't even want to have the behavior management battles, because it's been dealt with proactively on the front end by building relationships with kids, creating rapport, and also creating experiences that are highly engaging that they want to be a part of. And then you're not having those battles so often. Now, will there be behavior management issues? Of course there will be, but there will be fewer if you're building relationships first, and if you're creating strong, powerful learning experiences second. And so it always goes back to that. Like I say to teachers, it doesn't matter what you say if nobody's listening. And so it always comes back to trying to create presentations that are engaging. There's kind of I look at a triple Venn diagram of teaching. We have one circle, that's our content. We have to have that circle or we're just entertainers or babysitters, right? Well, there's lots of ways to learn your content. Now there's another circle that interlocks with that. I call it techniques and methods. And we have a whole toolbox of techniques and methods that we've received as teachers from our credential programs, from our trainings. And there's lots of books about the techniques and methods to teach. But then there's a third circle that nobody wants to talk about. And I've got this zeal to go and talk about. That third circle is presentation. So yeah, you know your content. Yeah, you've got all this toolbox of techniques and methods, but now how are you going to present it in such a way that's engaging for kids? How are you going to present it in such a way that it's trying to draw them in, right? And so that's that third circle that we talk about in Teach Like a Pirate, which is your presentation.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Let's pretend that, I mean, this isn't pretend, this is for real, because there are some burnt out teachers out there, whether they've been teaching too long or COVID has just wore on them. What would be your encouragement to those teachers who feel like they're on their last leg and they're burning out?
A couple things. First of all, it goes back to that it's okay to not be okay, especially during a pandemic. And so I've talked to a lot of teachers who are like, I just don't feel like I'm being as effective as I have been in the past. I don't feel like um, my instruction is on point like it has been in the past. I don't think that I'm basically they don't feel like they're living up to their potential as an educator right now. And I was like, whoa, hold on, wait. Of course not. It is a global pandemic, right? You are doing something that's never been done before or hasn't been done since 1918 anyway, right? It never been done in this style. And so with whether it's virtual, whether it's blended, whether it's face-to-face with social distancing, whatever it might be, you are inventing the plane as you are flying it. Or like basically in March of last year, you were taken over, you were flying comfortably in your educational plane probably, and you were taken over to the door. They opened the door, handed you a scrap of nylon and some string, pushed you out and said, build a parachute on the way down, right? And that's what educators have had to do. And in the midst of that, it's okay to be struggling because like I said, it's a pandemic. We're all struggling. And so I think that's the first thing is having that little bit of a grace for ourselves and where we are, having some grace for our colleagues, have some grace for our students who are doing school in a way which they've never done before and adjusting to that as well. And we don't know what their circumstances are as they're going through remote or distance learning, like what their home life is like, for example, in the background, while they're trying to also concentrate on school. And so there's all these things that are happening right now, and it's okay. So, but you can still know that you are exactly what those students need. And it's just the fact that you're showing up, the fact that you're there, the fact that you're giving your best is exactly what those students need. And that's all you can do. And so I think it's not trying to live up to any sort of previous standard, but to be okay with what's happening, that you're going to do the best you can with what you have, with where you are at this moment. And that's perfectly okay.
Would you say that these teachers have to have charisma in order to teach? If because there are some people that just tend to be low energy in general. I'm assuming that would be hard if I were a student, but do they have to have a certain level of charisma to be an effective teacher?
I'm a huge believer in charisma, and I think that it is important. And I think that right now what we're seeing is there's a new skill set of teaching in 2020 is that, like, for example, I've worked very hard to try to over the course of many years of doing book studies virtually and different things like that. I've presented virtually for a long time. And so of how can you have charisma? How can you generate energy and enthusiasm through through a screen, right? And so here's the thing. I see a lot of teachers who are very charismatic and passionate when they're face to face with their students, but then they get in front of the two-dimensional screen, and it's not just the screen that becomes flat. They become flat as well, and they lose that whole that affect and all that. And so how can you use a two-dimensional screen in a three-dimensional way? If you see me do a keynote or a presentation virtually, I'm like, you might feel like I'm popping out of the screen at you, right? Like I'm using my hands are moving in, and I'm like hook you in and draw you. So I'm using it in a three-dimensional way. I can go back and get big. I can move forward. I can whisper to you like this. I can disappear off the screen and pop back with my prop or whatever it might be. All these different things that are the things that we do in the classroom face to face. We can work better at developing that skill as virtual presenters as well. And the fact that you are just they're just seeing your kind of your upper body. You don't want to just be a stationary floating head, but you want to have some energy, some enthusiasm, and bring that to what you're doing in your virtual space as well.
So tell us, you were coaching, you were teaching. How did you find a good balance of time when, because you have a family and then you have your job and the coaching. So how did you balance it? How did you make it work? 'Cause sometimes it seems like all of it sucks all of our time and we don't have time for our families.
I'm not so sure that I'm the one to come to for balance. I'm not so sure that I'm great at that. But I think that's something I've gotten better at over the years. And I think it's really important, especially right now, to have a very intentional self-care practice. And so one of the things that's happened is that for a lot of teachers, there's a lack now of geographical separation between work and home and family. And they're all in the same space in many cases. And so what that happens sometimes, that means that work can like just suck up all the hours of the day because you're not breaking away from it and then getting in a car and driving. There's not that break. And so I think that's something that you have to be cautious of, and to make sure that there's some physical separation between your work and your home life, but then also just some mental separation and sometimes to unplug. And so part of my self-care practice is I try to win the mornings. I get up early, I get my exercise in, try to get my body moving, get that sweat going, and real focus on fitness and wellness right now. I just recently started to meditate. I got my meditation app, so I've incorporated that. I'm reading more right now, and that's not something I love to read, but I never make time to read. And now I am very intentional about it. I'm focusing on carving out part of my day to read. I'm carving out part of my day for my fitness. I'm carving out part of my day just to kind of to center myself via meditation or whatever it might be. And so I think now more than ever, it's important for teachers to have a very, very intentional and radical self-care strategies.
And what are you reading right now currently?
So right now, I'll show you. I should have it right here. The book I'm reading right now, which ties into that, I guess, I'm reading Ryan Holiday's "Stillness is the Key," which is
Mm.
about Stoic philosophy and applying Stoic philosophy to modern life. He has 3 books. Ego is the enemy, and the obstacle is the way, and stillness is the key. He has more, but those are kind of the 3 main books about Stoicism. And looking at Stoicism is not just something that was some obscure thing that a bunch of old people talked about, but like, hey, these principles can be used in modern society and modern life.
Would you say you're an introvert or extrovert?
So I'm kind of a funny one on this, because if you ever see me present, um, you would think that I'm wildly extroverted. And a lot of people mistake that. And so they see, and I am like a wild presenter. I usually end in a puddle of sweat, and it's about 1,000 words per minute. It's high energy. It is intense. My goal is I look out on the audience before I go out and say, I'm going to burn this place down around these people. Like, I'm going to set this place on fire, and I'm going to burn it down around these people. Right. I go out, I try to do that. And then I step off stage, and now I want to decompress. I want to have some time to myself or with a small group. And I'm very much an introvert often in my off hours. I'm not a big go to social events, go to parties, things like this at the conferences. And so I have a very extroverted side as a presenter, a performer, as a teacher. But then I can also unplug when I step off stage, and I have a very introverted side as well.
What inspires you?
So part of it as a teacher, it was embracing the mightier purpose of being an educator. And so one of the things that I do in Teach Like a Pirate is I break down passion into 3 categories. One of those passions is for your content. That's one category, your content passion. Another category is your professional passion. What is it about being an educator outside of your content? What is it about being an educator that you're passionate about, right? And then the third category is your personal passions. What is it completely outside of your profession that you're passionate about? And Teach Like a Pirate is about incorporating all those 3 things into what you do. And so as a professional passion, I was passionate about developing life-changing lessons for students. So not just the content standard, that's just the tip of the iceberg. What's below the surface? The fact that we're going to have a life-changing impact on the students in front of us. And I want to focus on those life-changing lesson aspects of education. So embracing that mightier purpose of being an educator is what had me on fire and wanting to come to school every day and be as good as I could possibly be. And I always tell people that mediocrity doesn't motivate. Nobody gets out of bed in the morning and says, I can't wait to get to school today and be lukewarm, right? That's not a motivating thing. I want to be on fire. I want to put kids on fire. I want to get them on fire about their education and about their life. Okay. And so that what gets me fired up as an educator. Now, as a publisher, what gets me on fire is helping to amplify the impact of other educators. And so I was able to amplify my impact through Teach Like a Pirate and through my presentations and all that. And now what we do is we find other educators who are out there doing powerful things, and we help them amplify their impact and spread their message to more and more educators, which is going to influence more and more students, more and more classrooms. And so now I'm at the point in my career now where I'm less interested in my message and more interested in trying to amplify the impact of our authors.
As we wrap up our conversation, what's some closing advice you'd like to give our audience?
Yeah, so I think that you are involved in a part of the greatest profession in the history of the world. You're never gonna find a profession that has more of an impact on society than being a teacher. And so that's part of that mightier purpose of being an educator. If you are struggling right now, remember how noble this profession is, how important this profession is, how much you mean to your students, and always tap into that, have that in the back of your mind, right? And know that there's a light at the end of the tunnel. And what is a very difficult time right now is not going to continue. And I have no end date. One of the most stressful things in life is uncertainty. And so even if we know that some result is going to be bad, but we just know what that result is, it's not as stressful as not knowing what it's going to. Uncertainty is extraordinarily stressful. And that's the place that we're in right now, because we don't have any end date on this. We don't know what's going to happen. We don't know when this is all going to finish. So it's hard. I've heard it. People refer to it. It's like running an extreme race, but they don't tell you how long it's going to be. Like if you have a marathon, 26.2 miles, right? A 10K, you know what it's going to be. This is like heading out on a race, but nobody tells you how long it's going to be. That's what we're in right now. That's a very stressful position. You don't know how hard to go. You don't know how to pace yourself because you don't know how many months are ahead of you. You know how many miles we have to go in this pandemic. And so, but know that there is going to be an end to this. Pace yourself. Don't push yourself too hard. Don't be hard on yourself. Give yourself that grace. And we're all going to come out of this. And this is not going to be a permanent situation.
I'm going to give you a statement that I heard at an in-service that we had, and I'm curious to what is your thought about it, because I've thought about this for years and I don't know where I stand on it. As a music teacher, I am constantly sweating and trying to be as engaging as I can. And so it struck me when I heard this person say that you should never be working harder than your students. Do you think that's true?
Yeah, I've heard that statement as well. Um, yeah, I'm not sure how I feel about that. I'm kind of conflicted about that. I think
Mhm.
that I think I worked very hard as an educator. I think I worked harder than some of my students. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but I have some. I'm not so sure that I 100% buy into that. By the way, as a music teacher, I can't pass the opportunity to pitch you one of our latest books, which is Pass the Baton. So we just published a book about teaching music in a more creative and innovative way called Pass the Baton. It's fantastic. And so any of your music teachers out there in your audience, we don't
Awesome.
usually do subject specific books, but we did do one for all the music teachers, whether they're band directors, whether they teach musical instruments, whether they're choir, whatever it might be. Pass the baton.
Pass the baton. Great. And as we wrap up, what are ways that people can connect with you?
Yeah, so you can find me on Twitter at Burgess Dave. My name just flipped around to Burgess Dave. If you are an Instagram person, you can find me at DBC underscore INC. So DBC underscore INC on Instagram. And I blog at daveburgess.com. If you want to find our business, it's daveburgessconsulting.com, but I blog at daveburgess.com. I would love to connect with you.
Thanks so much for being with us today. And thank you, Dave, for your time and message. You can watch bonus material from Dave's interview on YouTube or our website at www.thedirectorspodium.com. We call this segment the curtain call. And that curtain call is an informal time where we just kind of have fun conversation, and you really feel by the end of it, you know the speaker that we're interviewing. So catch us on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, and all major podcasting platforms. My name is Adam Christie. You are here with Dave Burgess, and we'll catch you on our next episode on the Directors Podium.